Um, the video I'm about to make, well, I am making, is about some very heavy subjects, so if you think that it's something that's is not, well, I presume if you're watching this you have an interest anyway, so I don't really need to give a disclaimer. But it's heavy subjects, I can't brush that off. Some of the heaviest subjects that I can think of to bring into any video, but I do feel it's important to talk about these things. So the angle I want to take with this is discussing several different conflicts and terminology used in those conflicts. The first thing I want to say here is that I am living in the comfort of a politically stable country with no war, no political violence, and I do believe that if I was in the middle of a war zone, my views would be shaped by that directly. As an outsider, I can only reflect on what I see from a wide range of different sources. So I'm very, very reluctant to attack or criticise anyone directly in a war zone. I engage in debates with people who are outside it, but I'm reluctant to engage in debates with people who are directly there because I feel a bit almost obnoxious patronising them about, because they know the situation better than I do. They're on the ground, I'm not. I could do as much homework and research as I want, but I'm not on the ground. So what I say here is reflections of an outsider. I've just watched an emotional broadcast by the British journalist Jon Snow. He's a very experienced journalist. He's in his mid-60s now, but he's been to some of the world's most notorious conflict hotspots. Well, his latest dispatch, he's an anchorman, but he also does field work for Channel 4. His latest dispatch is from Gaza, and it was very emotional. He was talking about the things he saw there. He wasn't angry, but he was clearly moved by it. He wasn't hysterical either, but it was obvious that he was moved by it. And I think it was a very balanced report. There was one Israeli coming on there and saying, "Oh, this journalist is biased against Israel." Now, I've made videos before where I've, let's say, played the devil's advocate for some of Israel's actions, and I will always, always, always say that the fact of Israel's existence is a fact. It's not going to go away. And any nation in the world has a right to defend itself against rocket attacks. Jon Snow pointed that out in the report, that he knows that those rockets fired by Hamas are designed to kill civilians. But I'm getting a little bit sick now of nationalistic Israelis who are basically have their head in the sand and just don't want to take any responsibility. They want to blame everything on Hamas. Now let me be clear, I think Hamas is a vile organisation, and it is true that they put weaponry and munitions in schools and hospitals. That is shameful, and they've got blood on their hands for doing that. But as each day goes by and the civilian toll mounts, those of us who do believe in Israel's right to defend itself would be looking increasingly foolish if we defend every single thing that Israel's doing here. And I believe Israel has gone too far this time. Far too far. Netanyahu has said that the objective is to destroy these tunnels. Well, they say that they've made headway in that, but look at the price. Over 1,200 deaths now and counting. I think I sometimes question why this conflict gets more attention than others, and I still stand by that point. I think there's much bloodier conflicts in the world that deserve more attention, but nevertheless, if you see killed and maimed Palestinian children and you don't respond emotionally, then you're a robot. Now, I've been branded as an Israeli apologist, and the insinuation there is that I am therefore callous to Palestinian suffering. That is absolutely not the case, and I resent the accusation. In the end of the day, whatever the intentions are, Israel has blood on its hands. I'll say that again. Israel has blood on its hands, and they cannot continue to blame each and every single death of civilians on Hamas. Yes, Hamas has responsibility. Yes, Hamas has put munitions into civilian outlets, but it is Israel that is responsible for this incursion. It is Israel that has superior military equipment. I'm not trivializing the rockets, but Israel is proportionally one of the strongest armies in the world, thanks to Uncle Sam. This is just a fact. So I'm getting a little bit tired of nationalistic Israelis whinging about media bias. Actually, there's a lot of people on the other side would say that the media is biased in favour of Israel. I mean, I've had Israelis say to me, oh, the BBC is biased against us. But, you know, the other side would be saying exactly the same thing. I think, actually, big networks have tried their best to be balanced in this. That's my perspective. Depending what side you're coming from, you're going to say that, oh, you're full of shit. But they have showed both sides. They've showed, almost on a daily basis, the suffering in Gaza. That's irrefutable to the pro-Palestinian people. That is indisputable. And to pro-Israeli people, you can't say that they haven't reported on the rockets, because they have. So I would defend the BBC here. I think they have tried their level best to get a balance. Where I would criticise them is they should have covered the anti-Israel protests more. It's a news story. Whatever your opinion is, it's still a news story, and there were big protests. But I would like to point out to some people that the situation in the UK is much better than it is in the United States. I believe there's more freedom of expression in the UK regarding this conflict than there is in the US, where there is a fierce pro-Israel lobby. Whilst I've defended Israel, I have also defended the right of people to criticise Israel, and I do take issue with militant Zionists who want to basically silence and bully others into silence. Whether that be legislators or senators, it's bullshit. And I think that's a disgraceful situation. Yes, Israel's a democracy, but that doesn't mean it's above criticism. India is also a democracy, so does that mean India is above criticism? With its many human rights abuses? So, there's a lot of narrative here that really needs to be challenged. One of the most highlighted themes of this is repeated use of the word genocide. This is something I really want to touch on. Like I said, I'm not on the ground, and if I was, I believe strongly that my views would be shaped. Now, I want to be very careful how I say this, because it could be so easily misinterpreted. What is happening in Gaza is horrible. Innocent civilians are being killed, and yes, Israel has blood on its hands for that. But I think we should be very, very careful about throwing this word genocide around, and I'll tell you why. Genocide, by definition, is a systematic, deliberate attempt to eradicate a specific group of people. Now, like I've already said, Israel is proportionally one of the strongest armies in the world. It's not a huge army, but in terms of its technology, it's very advanced and very powerful. So if they really wanted to, they could attempt to kill all 1.8 million Gazans. And let's put things in context. 1,200 people have died. That is a bloody conflict. But to compare that to genocide, I think is a grave misuse of the word. And what it actually does is devalues actual genocides. Genocide is what happened in Rwanda in 1994. Genocide is what happened in Srebrenica in July 1995, Srebrenica in Bosnia. That was a systematic attempt to kill Bosniak Muslim men and boys, specifically targeted. The Holodomor in Ukraine in the 1930s under Stalin's regime is widely considered a genocide. The Shoah, without doubt, was a genocide. It's better known as the Holocaust. That goes without saying. In fact, that's what first brought about debate about this term, and that's where the term first started to be developed. Some other examples in history. the mass killing of native Mayans in the Guatemala Civil War in the 70s and 80s was genocide. The Al-Anfal campaign in Iraq in 1988, when Saddam killed thousands of Kurds, that was genocide. So there's plenty of grim examples in history. Darfur is one of the most recent in Sudan. 300,000 plus people killed was genocide. Now, one of the problems with defining genocide is very often it is merges either as part of or in concurrence with civil war or an armed conflict. So a lot of people have said what's happening in Syria is genocide. That's harder to define, because whenever you have a situation of civil war, especially on the scale of the Syrian civil war, which is a very bloody civil war, and actually the bloodiest conflict of this decade, it's very difficult to A, document how many people are actually being killed, because you get so many mixed reports, and B, which party is mostly responsible. Now in the case of Syria, it's unquestionable that Assad has a lot of blood on his hands and his regime, but so does increasingly the Islamists who are operating there. And now of course they've moved into northern Iraq. In the latest grisly footage, something like 300 unarmed young men were slaughtered. Very grisly images. I mean, I can't imagine what must have went through those young men's mind as they were being killed. But the question is that a case of genocide, or is it just the ugly side of armed conflict? I say just, but this is the thing. War shouldn't be trivialized in comparison to genocide. The fact of the matter is they're both awful things. But genocide specifically means the deliberate attempt to kill a group of people. Now, inevitably, talking about this is incredibly politicized. So if you talk about it, and if you say that something is a genocide, something else isn't, then automatically you're accused of being an apologist for the regime, the government, or the body that is responsible for that bloodshed. So for example, if I say what's happening in Gaza is not genocide, then people will automatically turn around and say, oh, you're a filthy Zionist, you hate Palestinians, you think they should die, this sort of thing. Rubbish. I think it's horrible what's happening in Gaza. It's horrible, and I hope it ends soon. And I think Israel's went way too far this time, way too far. Even, by the way, the British Foreign Secretary has said that. Philip Hammond has pointed out that this time Britain is, which is usually one of Israel's staunchest defenders, Britain is losing sympathy for Israel by the day as the civilian death toll mounts. To put things in context, this is a lot deadlier than the last operation back in 2012 and 2009, and it looks like it's going to be a prolonged campaign. That would be a grave mistake. I know Israel wants to wipe Hamas, to eliminate Hamas, but it's going to be, they've said themselves that Hamas hides among civilians, so how are they technically going to do that? That would be my question to Netanyahu. How can you guarantee your intelligence services can eliminate Hamas? I mean, for one thing, every Hamas fighter you kill, you're going to breed 2 or 3 more Hamas fighters. Unfortunately, that's the way things are in Gaza. Now, I have seen the information, or propaganda, if you will, from the IDF that Hamas spends money on building tunnels. I think there's a fair claim in that. I mean, there's plenty of evidence for those tunnels. They do exist. And they argue that money could be spent on cement for hospitals and schools. But then, that's a paradox, because whenever Israel uses brute force, the hospitals and schools get destroyed. So Israel's sending out an inconsistent message. They're saying, oh yeah, we think it's terrible what's happening to civilians, but they're putting all the blame on Hamas. At some point, Israel has to take some responsibility. I mean, that's Israel's answer to everything. Oh, Hamas is using human shields. Now, like I say, Hamas is a vile organisation. I've got contempt for Hamas, and I believe that they do care more about attacking Israel than they do about their own civilians, but nevertheless, civilians are suffering. And one thing I would point out, one negative side effect from this is that all Israelis are going to be tarred with the same brush. I would like to point out to those who hate Israelis, not Israel, but Israelis, there have been thousands of Israelis condemning the government's actions. I've already made a video about the anti-Jewish rubbish. I don't need to go over that, but basically if you think Jew equals Israeli or equals Zionist, then you're an idiot. And I would add you're a bigoted idiot. This is by no means the deadliest conflict in the world right now, this year, or even in recent times. It's not even close, actually. If you look at some of the civil wars that have went on, if you just do a bit of homework, it's not even close. But that doesn't mean that we should trivialize it. And I fully understand why people are so emotional about this conflict, but you'd be pretty robotic if you weren't. Believe it or not, I am as unsettled by these images as anyone else, and I resent being called an apologist, because that insinuates that you are completely blind to everything that is going on. If I was an apologist, I would be saying, oh, Israel should just go in and wipe them all out. That would be apologia. I'm not an apologist. But I just don't subscribe to the school of thought that it's all Israel's fault. I just don't buy that. Having said that, Israel is militarily much stronger, so right now the onus does fall on Israel to end this thing. They can say Hamas don't want a ceasefire, but sooner or later, I know Israel abided by an Egyptian brokered ceasefire, but Hamas wasn't invited to that negotiation. So right now I would say the burden really does fall on Israel, because my message to Israel is that whilst there are many individuals that support what you're doing, world sympathy is definitely falling every single day. Even Fox News put this to Netanyahu, that every single day civilians are dying, Israel is losing sympathy. And I'm not one of these people that say Israel should be wiped off the map. I'm not, but I'm also getting a bit fed up with extreme Israelis who really do seem to have an incredibly biased perspective. Now, if I had rockets flying over where I was living every single day, I probably wouldn't be that sympathetic either, but those Israelis, instead of whinging about media bias, they need to really consider what is going on in Gaza, and then consider why the world is losing sympathy with Israel. It's so good just saying Hamas is using human shields. They may well be, but nevertheless, it is indisputable that a lot of civilian deaths have come directly from Israel. It doesn't matter that the intention is not there. Death is death. You know, it's no comfort to a Palestinian saying, oh well, we didn't mean to kill you. This has to end. But in terms of the wider context, I don't accept that this is genocide, and that is not the same as trivializing it. I believe this is bloody, tragic conflict, and that's a terrible thing. But it's not genocide, because like I say, if Israel really wanted to kill all Palestinians, they have the capabilities to do it, and they would try. Actually, someone earlier on in a thread I was looking at made a good point. If the Israelis are trying to commit genocide, they're doing a pretty lousy job. Because this conflict's been going on for what, 2 or 3 weeks now? If they want to commit genocide, then they've a long way to go to kill 1.8 million Gazans. So I think it's tragic, and it's heart-wrenching to see what's happening in Gaza. And for those Israelis who were attacking Jon Snow, look at his report and look at it carefully. He never said that Hamas, he hasn't made any pro-Hamas statements. All he was saying was, he's been there, he's seen this. He's a human being. Yes, he's an experienced journalist. Yes, I know you want him to be a robot, but he is a human being. And he was responding as a human being. I believe he has kept his integrity as a journalist with that report. I watched it. Just if you don't know what I'm talking about, just type in Jon Snow Gaza Channel 4. You'll see what I mean. He's a well-known British journalist. He's a very seasoned reporter, and he made an emotional speech about Gaza. But it wasn't a case of, oh, I condemn Israel. It wasn't that. For Israelis saying that, I would say look at the report again. And another message to those who are using what's happening in Gaza and Israel to justify your hatred of Jews, I would say grow up and just... It's not the same thing. Zionism and Judaism are not one and the same. There are thousands of Jews around the world who are staunchly anti-Israel. Look at Noam Chomsky, the academic. He is one of the most outspoken critics of Israel you can find. In Israel itself, there was 5,000 people protesting in Tel Aviv against Netanyahu. Bear in mind, Israel is a democracy, and there are different views within Israel. But most Israelis want to live in security, and most Gazans want this hell to end. Because there's no glossing it over, far more Palestinians have died. And yes, in previous videos I've said that's because of Iron Dome, true. But the fact is the fact. And what's happening in Gaza right now is a nightmare situation. It's not genocide. By definition, it is not genocide. But it is still a horrible situation. So what I would say now is Israel has to end this, because far too many civilians have died and they're losing world sympathy.